After 42 years, the Skywalker Saga has finally come to a close. That means today we're going to stop and rank all 12 theatrically released Star Wars movies from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all 12 theatrically released Star Wars movies. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. One more thing before we get started, you can pick up this shirt or any number of other shirts I wear inside of my videos at my merch store. They frequently have 35% off sales. They've got Baby Yoda shirts, they've got novelty Marvel shirts. If you're into nerdy stuff or movies, you should definitely check it out at that link down below in the description. With that said, let's get started. Coming in last place is Star Wars: The Clone Wars, a theatrically released marketing gimmick for the TV series. It's well documented. George Lucas looked at some of the initial footage for the TV series and he thought to himself, hey, we should go ahead and release that in the theater to kind of market this and sell more toys. And that's what they did. This was not created originally. It was not written originally to be a movie. They just recut some episodes into a film. And it shows rewatching the episode every 20 minutes, the length of an episode, there's a big fight followed by our main characters looking at each other and stating what they learned throughout the process of the last 20 minutes, and then they move on to the next episode. Next sequence. And maybe it would have worked if these were some of the better episodes of the series, but they're not. The main plot line involves Ahsoka Tano becoming Anakin's Padawan, and there being some confusion over that, and then they're on a rescue mission to save Jabba the Hutt's son, whom they call Stinky, and I don't even know what they were thinking with the Zero the Hutt character. All in all, this isn't just a bad movie, which it is, it's a cynical marketing gimmick. At number 11 is Attack of the Clones. For me, this is easily the weakest of the Star Wars episodes. There's no shortage of plot lines here. You got one about an assassination attempt, you've got a romance without any chemistry, you've got a mystery without any intrigue, but there's not really a central plot line driving the story forward. A big part of the problem here is that our main villain doesn't show up until about an hour and 15 minutes into the film, and he doesn't pose an imminent threat until he captures Obi-Wan Kenobi. And because of that, for the middle hour of the film, there's no sense of urgency or forward momentum. We're left planet hopping with Anakin and Padme as they deliver some of the cringiest dialogue ever put into a blockbuster. The entire movie relies on us buying into their relationship, and I just didn't. Beyond that, this is kind of where George Lucas really went over the top with the CGI and the green screen backdrops. So much of the movie just looks like actors who are overly lit walking in front of a cartoon. To its credit, I do enjoy several of the lightsaber battles inside of it, and the action can be pretty exciting. And as much as I've kind of picked on the film, it's still Star Wars, so I still find it very watchable. Kicking off our top 10 is The Phantom Menace. For me, this is one of the most frustrating films on the list because I think the idea of the central story and the structure are actually pretty good. The action is handled nicely, and if you just looked at a one-page summary of the story, it has clear stakes, motives, there's conflict, and there's a sense of urgency from a ticking clock. The idea of the movie, quite good. The execution, however, from the character choices to the dialogue, to the juvenile sense of humor, to the overly long Senate negotiations, Jar Jar midichlorians, they killed it. Even with all the major flaws with the execution of this movie, I think the lightsaber battles inside of this movie are very cool. Some people have an issue with them being overly choreographed, but I think that fits well with the idea of us watching several Jedi and a Sith in their prime using the Force. I would think that it would come off very choreographed to us. The pod racing sequence, also pretty fun and exciting, and John Williams' score, fantastic. Honestly, I think that this is a movie that's 3 or 4 changes away from being great. Granted, those are some very big changes. Next up, The Last Jedi, one of the most divisive films of all time. When The Force Awakens came out, it felt like Star Wars fandom was kind of in this honeymoon phase where we were just all enjoying the nostalgia. And then The Last Jedi came out, split the audience, and it feels like the two groups are watching totally different movies. It's the best. It's the worst. It's a masterpiece. It's filled with plot holes. It saved Star Wars. It ruined Star Wars. and my childhood. Now, I wouldn't say it ruined Star Wars, and obviously I don't think it's the worst Star Wars movie, but I was pretty disappointed with the choices that Rian Johnson made with where he was going to take the mythology. Like, I don't hate the idea of a disenfranchised Luke, but I don't feel like this movie did a good enough job building a bridge between where Luke was at in Return of the Jedi and where we see him in this film. There just wasn't enough dialogue, and the flashbacks didn't do enough to convince me of that's who Luke would turn into, that I could buy into it without just feeling a certain sense of kind of betrayal from it. Likewise, it feels like in the movie's attempts to explore this idea of fallen heroes, that it's actively punishing the heroes and the audience for wanting heroics inside of this story. There's certain things that us as Star Wars fans have come to expect from Star Wars movies because that's what we've been trained to expect from Star Wars movies, and this movie actively doesn't give us those moments. In doing so, it did subvert my expectations, but it didn't replace it with something that I wanted more or that I felt was better. With all that said, this is probably the best looking Star Wars film. The throne room sequence is gorgeous in both the choreography as well as the color schemes inside of it. It does make attempts to explore some big themes, and in a lot of ways, this is one of the more focused films on this list. Number 8, Solo. Without question, this is the least consequential of all the live action Star Wars movies. For all my criticisms of the films lower on this list, at least they made a big impact when it came to the characters and the mythology overall. This movie, it doesn't really do much to advance the world of Star Wars or even the character of Han Solo. But if you can get past the cringeworthy answers to questions that no one was asking and Lando's even more cringe-inducing droid in her politics, it's actually a pretty fun Star Wars adventure. And given all the drama behind the scenes and the director swap, it's awfully consistent in tone. One thing I actually really enjoy about this film is that it's not about the Force or intergalactic politics. It's just about a heist and a smuggler with a good heart. There's no big redemptive arcs. It's not about the Empire collapsing. It's not about Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. No, it is just about Han Solo doing his thing. And speaking of Han, I thought that Alden Ehrenreich did a pretty good Han Solo without doing an impression of Harrison Ford. Also, in light of the success of The Mandalorian, I've started to rethink if this movie would have done better as a Disney Plus series that was just about Han Solo and his many adventures as a smuggler, where they could have dug in deep into the mythology of Crimson Dawn and this underworld of Star Wars. It may be a bit on the bland side, but it's still a very easy to digest trip to the world of Star Wars. Coming in at number 7 is The Rise of Skywalker. Once again, J.J. Abrams applies his bag of tricks and provides yet another roller coaster ride in the world of Star Wars. It's never dull, it's always fun, and I thought it did a decent job of crossing the finish line. One of the most impressive things about this film was their ability to incorporate Carrie Fisher into it. She was way more involved in the plot than I was expecting, and she had a lot more screen time. It contains all the adventure, mythology, twists, turns, heroism, planet hopping that you expect from 2 Star Wars movies. Which is kind of the problem here, is it's all crammed into one movie. The movie feels a lot like a course correction from The Last Jedi. And that means that J.J. Abrams had to both set up and pay off the finale all in one movie. While I was fine with the majority of the answers that the film gave, it wasn't able to do all the setup that was required for them to feel totally earned, so they didn't have quite as much emotional punch as they should have. Now, while I definitely enjoyed this movie and I absolutely liked it, given that it's the end of a trilogy of trilogies, and the 9-film saga, it did feel a little bit disappointing. Then we have Revenge of the Sith. This is one of the toughest films for me to place on this list because moments inside of it are great. There are sequences that are the most emotionally potent of the entire franchise, but then in general, it also still has most of the shortcomings of the other 2 prequels. Now, there's a lot to love here. The lightsaber battle between Obi-Wan and Anakin is one of the best in the entire franchise. All of the action is exciting and fast-paced. The visuals are quite good, and the Order 66 sequence is an absolute punch to the gut. But the motivation for Anakin's turn and the execution of it were seriously lacking for me. With the way things play out, they make it so that Darth Vader isn't really a true believer in the dark side or the Empire. He's just a fool that was duped by an obvious snake oil salesman. And the actual reveal of Darth Vader in the suit and the death of Padme were laughably bad.
We don't know why. She has lost the will to live.
Despite the movie's overt flaws, it makes you feel emotions, sorrow, a sense of betrayal, excitement. And that's the most important thing. Bringing us into the top 5 is Rogue One. This immediate prequel to A New Hope perfectly captures the aesthetics of the original film and feels the most like the world of the original trilogy since the original trilogy. And maybe it's just nostalgia, but I love being in the ambiance and the atmosphere of this film. The first half meanders a little bit and struggles to find its footing, but as soon as the third act kicks in, this is some of the best war in Star Wars that we've ever seen. It's exciting, it's big, it's visceral, and even though we know that the rebels are going to be able to get the plans, you still feel like you're on the edge of your seat, and of course it closes out with that fantastic Vader sequence. And I think a big part of that is that as you're watching the movie, you know that our lead characters are going to die. You want to see them succeed, but you also know they don't make it out of this story, and so you feel this sense of dread and tension as you go through the film. Also, the space battle in this one, I think, is the best space battle since the space battle in Return of the Jedi. This is another film where, given how rocky the production was, it's pretty incredible how coherent and consistent and exciting the third act turned out to be. All in all, this movie's a really great complementary piece to go along with the original trilogy. Number 4, The Force Awakens. For me, this is probably the most easily accessible and entertaining Star Wars movie. From the pacing to the humor to the overt plays on nostalgia, this is a very easy to digest film. One thing that J.J. Abrams does really well is he creates these films that are roller coaster rides. Every 10 minutes you go up a hill and then you let go and you ride through the whole roller coaster. And even when you're going up the hill and things slow down, there's jokes all along the way to keep you engaged. For the most part, I enjoy all of the new characters. Poe brings the charisma. Finn brings this very organic and natural energy to the screen. Rey is like the new Luke, but she's not really like Luke, so it's a nice change of pace. And of course, it's great to see our legacy characters inside of the film, and Chewie gets some fantastic little jokes inside of it. But it's also a bit like your favorite fast food. It's enjoyable to eat, but you don't want to stop and think about what you're taking in. There's quite a few lapses in logic and a lot of plot conveniences. And I understand why they wanted to stay close to the template of A New Hope, but with so many plot beats just being repeated, I think it definitely hurt the film at times. It absolutely plays it safe, and it certainly plays the nostalgia card, but it plays the nostalgia card really well. For me right now, this is probably the most rewatchable of the Star Wars movies. Real quick before I give you my top 3, be sure to share your ranking down below in the comment section. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. Also, if you don't know, leading up to The Rise of Skywalker, I reviewed each of the films in the Skywalker Saga. You can check that out in this playlist right up here. Also, over the next week, I'll be doing a whole bunch of other rankings just like this one. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to come back over this next week for more content like this. In third place is The Return of the Jedi. This is a bit of a tricky one for me because it feels like 1.5 movies. The whole Jabba's palace rescue sequence feels like a prologue to the movie that's its own self-contained story with a beginning, middle, and end. Granted, a very fun and exciting little prologue to the movie. From there, the other 2/3 of the film are just a fantastic and satisfying conclusion. For my money, the space battle in this film is the greatest space battle that has ever been put to film. And of course, the throne room sequence with Luke, Vader, and the Emperor is so emotionally satisfying and exciting from beginning to end. Of all of the movies, I think that this is the one that does the best job of balancing a 3-front war. Now, I know a lot of people hate the Ewoks. Maybe it's because of my age and I grew up with them. I've never had any problems with the Ewoks. I like that sequence inside of the movie. Maybe the other ones are better, but it always made enough sense to me. Put it all together and you've got a great but disconnected first act, and then a very satisfying resolution to the character arcs and the plot, all while providing some fantastic spectacle. Our runner-up is A New Hope. The first film is still one of the best films. It's such a great introduction to this rebellion, this mythology, the Force, all of these characters, and it does it in such an efficient manner. It's able to say so much while saying so little, and it just sparks our imagination. In many ways, this film is the articulation of classic mythology for an entire generation. And it's also a movie, if you haven't watched it in a while, you forget just how fun this movie is once all of our crew and our characters get together and they're escaping from the Death Star. Once again, John Williams provides one of the most iconic and memorable scores ever put to film. At its core, it's just a classic adventure about good versus evil, a selfish rogue coming to save the day, and a simple farm boy becoming a hero. But in first place is The Empire Strikes Back. To the day, it's still one of the greatest sequels of all time. It takes the characters, the world building, and the mythology, and it builds on top of the greatness. On a pure technical level, it took the already groundbreaking special effects of the first film and just cranked them up to insane levels and did things that had never been seen before, and they made and crafted some of the most exciting action sequences of all time. One of the things that makes those action sequences so exciting is John Williams' score that is just so exuberant and exciting. It's actually my personal favorite of these John Williams Star Wars scores. On a story level, it's one part romance, one part coming of age story, a sprinkle of betrayal inside of it, all of it with these deep themes woven throughout it, and it makes it so every single sequence is packed with emotion and entertainment value. To this day, it remains one of the greatest films of all time, so it comes in at number 1. If you want to dig deeper into Star Wars with me, you can see my reviews of each of the films in the Skywalker Saga right there. If you want more rankings like this one, there's all of my Star Wars rankings right down there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.